Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
First off, Richard Kazimer in the United States, with Cuba saying on Sunday that the United States has been using social media to try and destabilize their regime.
Well, whether or not the U.S. had anything to do with it is still suspect. Well, what's interesting about this story, Phil, is that it's not necessarily the appearance of a very popular and benign Twitter-like social media network in Cuba that's called ZunZuneo, which means hummingbird, but its abrupt disappearance, and that prompted an investigation by the Associated Press news agency. Now, the AP is claiming they traced the creation of ZunZuneo to a humanitarian aid organization in the U.S. called U.S. Agency for International Development, and they supposedly had whipped up this covert intent of developing a bare-bones Cuban Twitter and using cell phone text messaging to circumvent the Castro regime and then start hitting these recipients with propaganda. Now, the plan was to build a massive subscriber base of 40,000 people or more of young Cubans on the social media. What they did was they started sending, rather benign weather, music, and sports lifestyle tweets. And then later on, the intent was to target with some subversive stuff with the intent of overthrowing the Castro regime.
So as it currently stands, they can't get access to Twitter as we know it. So they have to look for alternatives, and this was an American attempt to try, or allegedly an American attempt to try and provide that alternative, whereas Cuba had its own.
Exactly, because the Cuban media, even the social media and the internet and phones are heavily regulated. So this ZunZuneo came out of nowhere a couple of years ago and was running for about 2 years, and then suddenly disappeared. And how the AP found out about it is that there was, an agency that came up with this database of about 500,000 Cuban cell phone numbers, and then they traced it back to this humanitarian aid organization. They denied that they were involved in this possibly illegal covert plot, and the site just disappeared in 2012 because of what this aid agency said was lack of funding. All the funding for ZunZuneo was funneled out of secret accounts in the Cayman Islands that could not be traced back to the United States. Strangely enough, after all of this, now mind you that there were no messages sent through ZunZuneo that specifically mentioned the United States, specifically called for dissent against the Castro regime. It just was there. Everybody jumped on it, had a great time, and then it disappeared. And all the Cubans who were using ZunZuneo, even after they found out that it possibly could have been a covert operation, missed it. They loved it.
But it sounds like it was all innocuous stuff, as you're saying. So horoscopes, subversive horoscopes. You'll have a bad day today. Must be because you live in Cuba.
That could be it.
That sort of stuff, yeah. So maybe it was just too subtle. Now, another shooting in America. Now, we can't come... Obviously, in Australia, we love having a go at America because of your strange gun culture, which we just don't get. But it's very difficult to argue that this one is because the access to guns was too easy, because yet again, it was at an army base. And you sort of assume that, at army bases, there are going to be guns.
Well, that's its intent. Not everybody would be carrying a gun at Fort Hood, the base we're talking about here in Killeen, Texas. 36-year-old Army Specialist Ivan Lopez allegedly shot killed 3 soldiers and wounded 16 others, and then he turned the gun on himself and killed himself. As the investigation is ongoing right now, they're trying to piece together the cause of the shooting. The early indication is that it was a result of an altercation between Lopez and some others, and then that escalated into gun violence. The authorities have ruled out any act of terrorism. Lopez had been undergoing evaluation for post-traumatic stress disorder and treatment for depression and anxiety, but the commander at the base said that was not a direct factor in the shooting. Lopez's father in Puerto Rico said his son could not possibly have been in his right mind. It was just unlike him. And so it just goes on. And Fort Hood, as you might recall, was also the site of a mass shooting in 2009 when an Army Major, Nadal Malik Hassan, killed 13 people and wounded 32. He was captured alive. He faced 13 counts of murder and was convicted, and the military jury has recommended a death sentence. Understand, Phil, that Fort Hood is a large facility. There's nearly 100,000 people on this base at any given time, much, if not most of them, civilians.
Wow.
And the concept of searching anybody for weapons as they enter the base is unrealistic, especially somebody in uniform who may be required to wear a sidearm.
Yeah. And look, the whole idea that you train people to kill people, in effect, I'm not saying that we should stop that, because obviously it's a necessary facet of human life that we have war, and you've got to prepare for it. But I mean, it's hardly surprising, is it? If you train people to kill, then you put them in extreme situations that they come out of it just a little bit tarnished and not altogether sane. And who knows what the reaction to that is going to be?
Well, to put it in perspective of guns and mass killings, last month a group of knife-wielding men attacked a train station in southwestern China, killing 29 people and injuring more than 130. Chinese officials are calling this a terrorist strike with knives. So what do we do? Ban cutlery?
Well, they did that on the airlines for a while. Do you remember after 9/11, you got on a plane and you could have a fork, but you ended up with, I think even if you were traveling first class, you had one of those awkward plastic knives that could cut through nothing at all. And you almost said, can you pre-digest my food for me? Because clearly I can't cut it up myself. So we did reach that stage, didn't we? But I think bit by bit now you're allowed your cutlery back on planes. George W., the artist. Now, so obviously he was a crap president. Is he any better at art? What's the verdict?
Well, in the consummate oxymoron of the words Texas and art exhibit, an exhibit of paintings by America's favorite moron, former President George W. Bush, opened in Dallas last week. Now, mind you, not in any legitimate art museum or gallery, but rather at the George W. Bush Presidential Center. That's on the campus of Southern Methodist University.
Right.
Now, since leaving office, the former leader of the free world has busied himself staying within the safe confines of the United States and trying to avoid several countries' arrest warrants for war crimes against him. So what he's done is he's taking up painting, and the exhibit is called The Art of Leadership, a President's Personal Diplomacy, and it features portraits of many of the world leaders that George W. Bush met, still has difficulty remembering their respective countries, let alone how to pronounce their names. Now, as far as the paintings
you don't need to
themselves,
do that. Yeah. Well, so what do you think of them? So I mean, before you give me your appraisal, I've seen them, and they're good, but they're not really good, are they?
Well,
you're
you're kinder than most of the critics. One critic said the paintings are primitive and amateurish, which is kind of how I remember him as president.
Yeah.
Even Bush himself admits that his signature, which he only signs as W, is probably worth more than the paintings, and even that's being a bit pretentious. He's not the first president who did paintings. Ulysses S. Grant studied painting in West Point. Dwight Eisenhower also did painting. I remember Dwight Eisenhower. I'm old enough to remember Eisenhower back in the 50s. And I remember a news story showing him painting a landscape. And as the camera panned in close, you could see it was one of those paint by numbers deals. So I kid you not. And Jimmy Carter also painted nature scenes.
Don't put that down. You still got to choose the right color.
Yeah.
You've got to get the right colors, and you got to do it between the lines. I mean, it's not as easy. It's not as easy as you might think.
In all honesty, Bush's art is dreadful dreck. It's awful, terrible stuff.
So, but it's going to sell, isn't it? I mean, people are going to buy it.
No, it will not. It will not. I mean, some Republican or GOP fundraiser donor, some money bags is going to buy this stuff up, if anything, just as a joke. It's like Velvet Elvis paintings. This stuff is really not going to hold any value whatsoever.
Still, it's nice, isn't it, that he's got something to occupy his quite small mind, and it's probably quite therapeutic for him as well, I should think.
He's a clean palate all the time. So
that's right. And as long as he's in there doing that, he's not causing any harm, so everyone's happy. Now, John Kerry is trying to do some good. The U.S. Secretary of State trying to do the impossible, I think, which is, of course, peace in the Middle East, something we're never going to see. But he's now saying that even though this was a personal ambition, talks between Palestine and Israel are on the brink of collapse. I mean, we have been down this road so many times.
Well, in spite of his well-intentioned best efforts, as you say, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry indicated Friday that the Obama administration's attempt at reviving these ongoing peace talks between Israel and Palestine is probably a lost cause, and for no other reason than the hard-line stances of the recurringly electable Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and whomever happens to be speaking for the Palestinians at any given moment, which today is Mahmoud Abbas. And as is their wont in the past 50 years, both sides are agreeing on nothing from prisoner exchanges to land occupation, including the Palestine's legitimacy as a state. Israel, as usual, holds all the cards, has the military might, a history of indiscriminate usage. They don't care what the UN or the U.S. says, and Palestine, to be honest and blunt, doesn't have a pot to piss in. So they're pretty much between a rock and a hard place. Kerry said on Friday that the talks are close to collapse, suggested a reality check to assess further involvement, I'm quoting now, to the current administration's role in all of this.
Yeah, well, I think Netanyahu, so long as he's there, there's too much history. So long as he's there, it's going to be pretty difficult, isn't it? It's interesting, though. We always look at Abbas and look at, and claim he's an extremist, whereas Netanyahu is as much, I think.
Well, what's happening to you here, too, Phil, and I don't mean to interrupt, in the past, there's been strong U.S. support for Israel protecting itself from Palestinian attacks, and through the years, much of it due to our 24/7 news cycle. The general public has really grown tired of the brutal Israeli aggression, has become kind of, paradoxically sympathetic to the Palestinians, but also apathetic to the continued support of Israel by the United States.
Well, I mean, over the last few years, we've seen Israelis protesting against their own government and siding with the Palestinians in some cases as well. So maybe the tide is turning. Maybe we will reach some sort of equitable situation, but it's going to take some time, I think, and it's going to probably another generational thing before it really starts to take hold. On simpler matters, a 5-year-old has hacked Xbox, got Sony running. What I love about this story is how Sony responded by saying, well, thanks for solving this problem for us. Here's Xbox for a year. Whoa, whoopee-doo.
Well, bless his little pumpkin head, 5-year-old Christopher Von Hassel of Ocean Beach, California. He made headlines this week, hacked into his dad's Xbox account and exposed a security flaw. It seems the budding Bill Gates, he was able to log into his dad's Xbox Live account, even though he didn't know the password, simply by, and like a monkey, randomly banging on the keyboard until he gained access. His father, of all things, Bob Davis, is a computer security expert. He brought this little cyber faux pas to the attention of Microsoft, and they promptly made the 5-year-old Christopher head of their research and development department.
No.
Microsoft has since fixed the glitch. But you can expect Microsoft or Xbox competitor Nintendo to file a complaint with the Ocean City Child Services Department against the kid's dad for neglect and allowing his toddler to play video games unsupervised, particularly those made by Microsoft.
That might be the real story here. Look, apparently it was as easy as he just put 3 space bars in or something. When it came back, he got the password wrong, and it came back and said, what's the password? And he just put 3 spaces in. And it said, that's good enough for me.
In engineering parlance, it's called impact engineering. You just bang on it until something happens.
but the response from Sony, I think, was having discovered this breach, which could have cost them a lot of money. They said, here's a subscription for a year or something, and a gift pack, which, I don't know, maybe had some stickers and a signed photograph of the CEO or something. But certainly, it wasn't an overly generous response, it's fair to say, for this story.
No, it's kind of like when you get a can of bad food and you don't like it, and then you complain. There's usually, like here in America, on any product, they'll have an 800 number that you can call to complain if you get a can of beans or whatever, and it's terrible, that you'll call them and say, you know what, I bought this food and it was terrible. Then they send you coupons for free food, the same food that you just said was terrible. It's the same thing with this Xbox deal.
Yeah, exactly. I've just been to this art exhibit and it was crap. Oh yeah, well look, here's another return voucher, so you can go and see the same George W. exhibit. Same story.
We did elect him twice.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what your excuse is there, Richard. Good. I'm sure you didn't. Good to talk. Let's do it again next week.
All right, brother. Take care.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.